For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has been the world's most dangerous energy corridor, a narrow waterway where roughly 20% of global oil moves every single day. But in the last 72 hours, something has changed. Iran has launched what officials and analysts describe as one of its largest direct aerial attacks ever aimed at Israel. Projectiles were launched in waves. Israel's air defenses lit up the night sky. And despite Israel's layered shield, some missiles reportedly got through, with explosions reported inside Israeli territory. And as the world watches the Middle East edge closer to open war, another signal is flashing from far beyond the region. North Korea has issued new warnings toward Washington, pairing rhetoric with renewed missile activity. The message from Pyongyang, at minimum, is that this crisis is being watched and potentially exploited well outside the Middle East. This is no longer just a regional story. This is a global stability story, with energy routes, alliance politics, and deterrence all colliding at the same time. If you want updates like this first, subscribe to Capture Brief within the next minute, because in a fast-moving conflict, the timeline can change overnight. For years, the confrontation between Israel and Iran largely unfolded in the shadows. Cyber operations, covert intelligence missions, sabotage accusations, proxy warfare across the region. Both sides have blamed the other for targeted strikes, assassinations, and attacks on strategic infrastructure, often without public confirmation, often with plausible deniability built in. Yet, even with that constant pressure, direct military confrontation between Iran and Israel remained rare, limited, indirect, and carefully managed to avoid uncontrolled escalation. That changed on a single night. After a series of strikes on Iranian-linked targets in Syria, reported by multiple outlets but with key operational details still disputed, Tehran responded with what analysts have described as a major multi-wave aerial assault directed toward Israeli territory. The retaliation unfolded in waves, with missiles and explosive payloads launched toward multiple locations. Air raid sirens echoed across Israeli cities as defensive systems activated. Missiles streaked across the night sky while interception attempts lit the horizon. In some early reporting, certain munitions were described as carrying submunitions, sometimes broadly labeled as cluster-type effects, designed to disperse multiple explosive elements over a wider area. Those specific claims are difficult to independently verify in real time, but the intent described by analysts was consistent: increase the probability of impact, stress defenses, and threaten multiple sites at once. Despite advanced air defense networks, several projectiles reportedly reached Israeli territory. Explosions were reported in multiple locations as debris and blast impacts followed the barrage. For residents watching from rooftops and shelters, the scale of the night was unmistakable. The long-running shadow war appeared to rupture into a more open, direct confrontation, and it immediately raised a second question: what happens next on land, in the air, and at sea? For more than a decade, one system has come to symbolize Israel's defensive shield: Iron Dome. Designed to intercept rockets and artillery shells before they reach populated areas, Iron Dome has demonstrated a strong success rate in previous conflicts. Using radar tracking and predictive algorithms, the system estimates where an incoming projectile will land. If the system determines a threat to a populated zone or critical area, an interceptor missile is launched to destroy the target in mid-air. In earlier confrontations, this technology helped neutralize large numbers of incoming rockets. But the night of the Iranian barrage appeared different, in both volume and complexity. Videos circulating online showed interceptions lighting the sky over Israeli cities, bright arcs rising to meet incoming threats, followed by flashes that suggested successful intercepts. But some footage also appeared to show impacts: projectiles evading interception, fireballs, and shockwaves in multiple locations. Analysts caution that social media video can be misleading without geolocation and verification. But the pattern being discussed was consistent across multiple sources. At least some projectiles reached the ground. And that leads to how modern air defense can be stressed. Iranian forces appeared to employ a saturation tactic, launching a large number of projectiles close together to strain interceptors, radar tracking, and decision cycles. Even advanced defenses have limits, especially when threats arrive from multiple directions and at varying speeds and altitudes. Another factor analysts raised, the apparent mix of weapon types: drones, ballistic missiles, and possibly cruise missiles, each presenting different detection and interception challenges. And then there is the issue of targeting. Unlike earlier periods dominated by unguided rockets, some incoming projectiles appeared aimed at more specific locations, suggesting a shift toward deliberate targeting rather than purely symbolic mass fire. As analysts examined the impact pattern, another possibility emerged that the barrage may have been directed, at least in part, towards specific pieces of military and intelligence infrastructure. Among the locations mentioned in early discussion, facilities linked in open-source reporting to Unit 8200. Unit 8200 is widely described as one of Israel's most important intelligence organizations, associated with signals intelligence, cyber operations, and electronic surveillance. Analysts say its capabilities support monitoring of communications networks, interception of digital signals, and cyber activity that plays a major role in Israel's national security posture. Facilities associated with that kind of work are considered high-value strategic assets. If such locations were intentionally targeted, the implications would be significant. Because disrupting intelligence infrastructure doesn't just damage a building. Signals intelligence centers support command networks, surveillance operations, and real-time battlefield coordination. Even temporary disruption can degrade situational awareness in the middle of a fast-moving conflict. That is why attacks framed as hitting intelligence sites represent a different strategic logic than strikes aimed only at symbolic targets. Rather than demonstrating reach alone, they seek to weaken the operational capabilities that support military decision-making. And if that is the direction this conflict is moving toward, command, control, and intelligence nodes, the escalation ladder becomes steeper. Now, before we go further, here's that second reminder about 2 minutes after the first. If you want news updates like this first, subscribe to Capture Brief and turn on notifications so you catch the next major development as it breaks. As the confrontation intensified, attention began shifting beyond the immediate battlefield toward the wider global implications. In the United States, political leaders, including former President Donald Trump, commented on the growing crisis, warning that a direct Israel-Iran confrontation could expand into a broader regional emergency. One of the central concerns, the security of the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow passage carries roughly a fifth of the world's traded oil supply. Tankers transporting crude from Gulf producers pass through the strait before entering global markets. Any disruption to this route can rapidly affect energy prices, shipping insurance, and supply chains worldwide. US officials have repeatedly warned that the strait could become a flashpoint if the conflict escalates further. And as a result, Washington has urged allied nations to consider contributing naval forces to help protect commercial shipping. The concept is familiar: a multinational maritime presence designed to deter attacks on tankers, track threats, and reassure markets that energy exports can keep moving. Governments have been asked to consider deploying warships, surveillance aircraft, and patrol assets to monitor the corridor and respond to incidents. The move reflects a deeper fear that this crisis could shift from airstrikes and missile exchanges into a maritime confrontation where the economic consequences are immediate and global. But the international response has been cautious and in some cases reluctant. France confirmed it had positioned naval assets toward the Gulf region while emphasizing that its posture would remain defensive. French officials have signaled their mission focus would be the protection of commercial shipping and situational awareness rather than joining offensive operations. The United Kingdom's public messaging has also reflected restraint. British officials have referenced lessons from Iraq-era decision-making, signaling reluctance to become entangled in another Middle East campaign without clear legal framing and international consensus. Other powers have taken even more distant positions. China has rejected the idea of joining a military coalition outright, emphasizing regional stability, uninterrupted energy trade, and diplomacy over deployment. Japan has signaled hesitation about direct involvement, influenced in part by domestic legal and constitutional constraints on overseas military operations. Even where Japan has strong energy dependence, officials have indicated any role would likely focus on monitoring, logistics, or defensive measures rather than combat operations. Taken together, the responses suggest a fragmented international landscape. The conflict is intensifying, but major powers remain divided on how or whether to intervene militarily. And that matters because deterrence depends not only on capability, but on coalition credibility. As tensions continued rising, the conflict began casting a wider shadow across multiple regions at once. Iranian officials issued warnings not only to governments but also to international corporations operating in the Gulf. Energy companies, shipping firms, and industrial contractors with facilities in the region were cautioned that infrastructure could become vulnerable if the confrontation escalates further. Some Iranian commentary has explicitly referenced entities connected to U.S. economic interests, implying that commercial logistics networks could face heightened risk. The message was clear: this conflict may not remain confined to military targets, and the economic layer could become part of the pressure strategy. At the same time, Tehran directed warnings toward Ukraine, cautioning against any support, direct or indirect, that could be interpreted as aiding Israel's military capabilities, including drone-related technology. Those claims and counterclaims are difficult to verify, but the signaling itself is important. It suggests Iran is attempting to widen the diplomatic and strategic cost of alignment. And then beyond the Middle East, developments in East Asia added to the atmosphere of global uncertainty. North Korea has conducted missile tests and issued statements warning Washington about joint military exercises in the region. Pyongyang's posture does not mean it is part of the Middle East conflict, but it does mean US planners are being forced to think in multiple theaters at once. In global crises, opportunistic signaling is a known pattern. One confrontation can create openings for pressure elsewhere. Taken together, these events suggest the Israel-Iran confrontation is being watched closely by governments far beyond the region, and that the risk is not only escalation in one place, but multiple regional tensions rising simultaneously. And that brings us back to Hormuz, because the strait is not just geography, it is leverage. In moments like this, global markets watch shipping lanes the way militaries watch front lines. Any credible threat to tanker traffic can raise insurance premiums overnight, divert ships, tighten supply, and push prices higher, even before a single vessel is hit. So the story right now is not only what happened in the skies over Israel, it's the chain reaction, military escalation, alliance positioning, energy vulnerability, and global opportunism. And as this develops, the key question is whether governments can contain this crisis within a regional box, or whether the combination of air war, maritime risk, and multi-theater pressure pulls the world into something far broader than anyone planned. We will continue tracking verified updates as they emerge,